guys, it's Rebecca Scritchfield, author of the book Body Kindness and host of this podcast. I just wanted to make sure that you all know about the free e-course I now have available. It's at bodykindnessbook.com. Click on Get Started, and when you give your name and email address, you will get an email that will give you instant access to my free on-demand digital training, and we're going to get you started on your body kindness journey right away. And if you don't have the book Body Kindness yet, you'll get to get a little snack by enjoying the first chapter, and you can pick up the book Body Kindness wherever books are sold. If you haven't heard, I was so thrilled that the New York Times book review reviewed Body Kindness and said it was simple and true, and that for the vast majority of us, diets don't work and we need to figure out how to change our habits instead. I've been thrilled with the response I've gotten so far. I've had people post pictures of their grandmas holding the book. Their kids are holding the book. I'm getting photos of their scales being smashed to smithereens or notes saying, "I'm not your friend anymore." I love it. Keep it coming. And remember that the journey toward health and wellness starts by being good to yourself. I look forward to seeing you online at my website, bodykindnessbook.com, and also on social media. Because real health is about being good to yourself, it's time for Body Kindness, the place where all bodies fit and weight is just a number. Hi, I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, author of the book Body Kindness, a registered dietitian and nutritionist, and host of this podcast. My topic today is why resolutions fail, the allure of cleansing and other rituals, and the food and diet trend predictions for 2017. So, of course, I'm really excited to talk about this topic because as we exit Diet Month, which we all coin as January as being the big diet month, it's really helpful to look ahead to try to analyze and figure out why are we so drawn to this stuff in the first place, and what can we do if we really do care about improving our health and well-being, but don't want to get stuck just following joyless or unhelpful plans. I have a very special guest today to discuss this topic. His name is Alan Levinovitz. Alan received his PhD in religion from the University of Chicago, where he specializes in classical Chinese thought. He is now assistant professor of religious studies at James Madison University, where he teaches classes on religion, Chinese philosophy, and the connection between religion and medicine. His work in journalism focuses on food, science, and culture, and he has appeared in The Atlantic, Wired, The Washington Post, Slate, Vox, and elsewhere. He is the author of The Gluten Lie and Other Myths About What You Eat. And his only food taboo is fake cheese. Amen. Which he believes is irredeemably evil. I could not agree more. Welcome, Alan. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, first of all, I just want to tell you how much I loved listening to your book. I remember I was in the car, and luckily I had a 5-hour car ride, so I could get through most of it in one sitting. And it was very good. I first became familiar with you and your work actually through your articles. And there was a really good article, I think it was the Atlantic article, that talked about the idea of food purity and cleansing and rituals. And it really made sense that I was learning about this from an angle of religion. And I got really curious about, wow, this stuff might go really, really far back. And yeah, so I was really fascinated because it's like people like me, I feel like I have an agenda because I was hurt by diets and I don't think they're helpful and I don't think they improve health. And so as a health expert, I want people to find a better way to health and well-being and reject dieting. So like I have a clear agenda. But when I think about your role in this space, is it's not an agenda to really push people to be sure to eat your vegetables, but it offers a different lens to get curious about why do we even feel drawn toward the idea of clean eating and even restricting our foods. Like I remember the first time I realized, wow, there is religious fasting. So maybe there's something more than just what my experience was always like, getting that bikini body. So yeah, I've loved your work and I'm really excited to talk to you about these intersections.
Terrific.
So let's kind of dive into the whole idea of religion and how you think it can help us understand our attitudes about food.
Well, when I first got into this, and I have to admit, I was very surprised as a religion scholar to be writing about modern dietary culture. But it was becoming clear to me when I was in stores or listening to people talk that so much of our obsession with food isn't just about our physical health. You'd see products labeled pure, or you would see, halo ice cream, I think it's called, where there's quite literally a halo on the ice cream, the idea of being good by eating well. And I started to make a connection between the rhetoric of purity and cleansing and goodness that I saw in modern food movements and the sorts of patterns that I saw studying Chinese monks from 3,000 years ago who had the exact same kind of stuff. I mean, Rebecca, it's unbelievable. This is long ago, right? Back when everyone was healthy and happy. And these monks were saying things like, well, if you don't eat the 5 grains and you take our special supplement regimens, you will cleanse yourself of all your impurities. You'll live forever. You'll be able to fly and teleport. And so I really thought that bringing the perspective of a religious studies scholar to everyday practices in our own lives might actually help people to realize that what they're searching for when they cleanse themselves or when they go on a diet is actually much more than losing a few pounds or looking better. I think what people are really searching for is purity, is feeling like they are worthwhile human beings. And as I know all too well from studying religion, you're not going to become a worthwhile being just by changing what it is you eat or how you look. So there's a real big disconnect between what people need from their rituals and the kinds of rituals that they're doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And really this idea of worthiness, right? Like it is, I think the stat is that by the time you're a teenager, around 80% of teenagers are already dissatisfied with their body. And that just continues to grow into adulthood. And yes, the numbers are lower in boys and in girls and in men than in women, but they're not that much lower. I mean, we're talking pretty much almost everybody feels uncomfortable in their body, has a bad relationship with their body. And so if you're feeling unworthy already, then along comes this promise of this plan, what this is going to make it all better. This is going to make you more, whether we're valuing thinness and bikini body ready, or we're valuing this idea of eating unprocessed, or I quit sugar. This idea that if I do this thing, it is going to make me a better person. And that's just a far cry from fruits and veggies. They fill you up and they have nutrients that help give you energy, something that is also valuable. But we could have 100 people eat the same exact meals and they're still going to look different because it's not just the control of what you put into your body. So I just find that really interesting. And yeah, do you think that, is there any way that we kind of can't help it because of what we're told in today's messages?
Well, I think there's a sort of universal human desire for simple rules, for panaceas, for big miracles. We're all living this life together. We're all in the human condition. We all are in some way or another dissatisfied with ourselves and searching for meaning. And it's comforting when someone says to you, here's the 5 things you can do that will finally make you happy. And in a largely secular cultural sphere, which is although there's some great crossover between religion and dieting, and there's some amazing religious dieting books out there, amazing, also horrifying in the sense that they'll say things like, God doesn't like you if you're fat. I mean, they're really terrifying. Sloth and sin get associated with laziness. But generally speaking, people think that the key to secular fulfillment is in large part bound up with how they look. And so they want simple dietary rules that are a lot like religious dietary rules that would be familiar to anyone who's studied Judaism, for example, or Islam. And you get things like never eat sugar. Here are the 5 foods you can never eat, as if there's some kind of formula handed down by a divinity that tells you the magical foods that will lead to your salvation. And of course, they won't lead to your salvation. And even if you do end up looking the way you think will make you happy, that won't lead to your salvation either. And so it's really, to me, it's kind of tragic to see people being endlessly sold a spiritually hollow vision of what food is and what it can accomplish, and seeing them almost without a choice but to buy into it. These images of celebrities who appear happy, of course they're not. They're wretchedly miserable because they're forbidding themselves things all the time. Mm-hmm. But these illusions, which, to use a religious term, are really nothing more than idolatry. They're nothing more than thinking that some simple physical change is going to provide you with the spiritual wholeness, the real health that combines mind and body that everyone seeks. It is tragic. And so I'm really excited when I read a book like yours to see you pushing back against this hollow vision and trying to get people to be genuinely concerned about treating themselves in a way that might actually lead to better well-being instead of just better looks.
I could not agree with you more. I was so surprised as I started doing individual counseling and just seeing so many different people, different backgrounds, different education levels, but all well-educated. And there was a consistent, I'm at war with my body going on. It didn't matter what weight they were. I'd have a mom who just, you would think that she looked like she was in Bethesda magazine or something, the mom that has it all together. It's just, I'm afraid to wear a bathing suit at the beach. I just don't want to be seen. And what I have learned is that our beliefs are just they're very strong and they're hard to crack, and that they're made up of thoughts that we tell ourselves over and over and over again. So if you have started in your teen years telling yourself how awful you look and how you need to change things and the diet's going to help you, and then you get those messages reinforced by culture, they become your belief system. And even when you see that something isn't working, it can be very hard to disentangle yourself. And right now, I feel like there's another wave of Weight Watchers coming through with Oprah and everything. And I really do. She struggled enough with food in her body for her whole life. I really, really hope that she is in a better place, like what she is talking about in some of the articles that I'm seeing come out. But I had shared it online, just this clarification that it is how it's your choices and your habits and not necessarily your weight and everything like that. And I asked people to chime in, and a few people who are already following me and Body Kindness are talking about how they are on Weight Watchers, and it lit, like, I can see the sadness in their writing, because it's like, I'm on Weight Watchers and when I follow it, I'm good, but I need to track these things. I need to count calories, because if I don't, my boyfriend or partner or spouse, he could eat just one brownie, but I can't do that. My body doesn't work that way. But if I write it down, then I'm accountable. I just see it as being this tough situation, because I always want to be helpful. I don't want to tell people that something isn't working for them that they believe is working. But it's like, you still see, well, how are you going to make choices outside of that structure? And in a way, to me, I see the diet as that prison or that jail. So like how you were saying, it's an illusion. And it's just really fascinating to kind of see this attachment to, I've got to follow these rules so that I stay in line, as opposed to maybe I can change the way I think about things and change my behaviors, because that's where your freedom really is.
Right. Absolutely. No, I think this is such a key difference, again, between religion, I think, practiced well, and dieting, which is always seen as a means to an end, right? So the religious practitioner, I mean, not all religious practitioners, obviously, but the religious practitioner that I imagine isn't practicing their religion as a means to an end. It's an end in itself. They've decided to take up a certain set of rituals so that they can be spiritually whole, so that they can be a better person, so that they can be closer to God, whatever it is. You would never see a religious person say about their own religion, oh yeah, I'm going to do this just until I get to the point where I'm happy with myself. And then I'm dropping all the rules, right? And I think that's exactly how people see their own reformed diets, at least function that way, right? The idea is not that you will be on a diet forever, that it will be who you become, but rather that it will get you to a certain place. And what you don't realize is that the longer you do it, the more the bars of that cage close in and the less capable you are of living without it. And so instead, what you do is you turn something that you would never in a million years wish upon yourself for the rest of your life into the sphere in which you feel safe and comfortable, and you can't leave it behind. And that's really tragic, right? Instead of doing something that can be a part of your life, like a religion that you can practice for the rest of your life, you end up locking yourself somewhere that you had originally only imagined as kind of a punishing short-term step to get you where you needed to be.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit about why, beyond a New Year's resolution, but I resolve I'm going to change my habits. What kind of is an approach where it works? But I think even more importantly, why so often the sort of rigid approach ends up backfiring and failing on people?
I think a large part of it is related to what I just talked about, this idea that you're going to adopt a set of practices that you can eventually let go of once you are at a place that you're happy with. And so if you're on a diet or if you have a resolution, what you end up doing is kind of muscling your way through this punishment to yourself, like self-flagellation or something like that. And then you stop. But of course, you never put a plan in place for the kind of life that you want to live for the rest of your life. All you did was focus on the punishment and the deprivation. And so when it's over, all you want to do is revel in all of the things that you've repressed. You want to enjoy yourself again. You're even more likely to indulge in the kinds of things that perhaps you were already dissatisfied with your relationship with. And so instead of having set up a sustainable, long-term pattern for your life that you're happy with, you punish yourself and flagellate yourself, which is a hugely unsustainable relationship to life. And so I think that resolutions, if they're to be effective, need to be not about short-term changes that make you into the person you want to be, but long-term changes that are a part of the person that you always want to be. And that distinction is something that rarely comes up. I think it comes up in your book, obviously, but when people are thinking about diets, that's not how they think about them. And that's a recipe for failure.
And I think what also is failure, and I think we're saying the same thing, but from two different angles, is the idea that we can only deprive ourselves for so long. Like we really are pleasure-seeking creatures, and we can only suppress a desire to enjoy food, or the more you say, I can't have any dessert at all, the more you think about it, the more you want it. And so whenever you do open that tiny little window of here's your chance, it feels out of control. It feels like you want to eat the whole cake, even if you don't let yourself. But now you don't trust this feeling that you have. And in most people, they just don't get that the reason why the urge was so strong in the first place was by and large because of all the effort they put into avoiding it and don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, and feeling deprived. And it's like rebounding in this other direction where I need my reward now.
Right, absolutely. And I think another problem is that people make all of the effort, they situate all of the effort within themselves. So I think there's a lot of, I'm a bad person, I can't resist this thing, I need to resist this thing. Whereas the truth is, as you and I both know, there are obviously eating habits that are more or less healthy than others over the course of one's life. But I think the fault, the reason people don't necessarily adopt eating habits is usually located outside of them, right? It's not because you're a bad, sinful person that can't resist stuff. It's because our culture places us in contexts where simultaneously we are told to indulge and eat as a primary means of seeking pleasure all the time without any regard to our life patterns. And on the other hand, we're told that we need to look impossibly good and not indulge in any of those things. So that stress, that tension between what we are called to do by the world around us also takes a toll on our ability to just live a normal, happy, sustainable life. And I think that if people focused more on how to make the world around them better for their own eating habits, mentally and physically, they would feel a lot better and be able to keep up resolutions a lot more than if they simply focus on themselves and think about what's wrong with them and how they can be better.
And I think we often market that the diet culture often markets that your weight is 100% within your control. because then if I take action and follow your diet, then I'm going to see the weight loss results I want. And it's completely misleading. There's so many things that control your weight, and behaviors have a role. They make an impact, but it's so different among so many people. I mean, you can find a person. I have friends who are fat vegans, right? So all the vegans that are like, eat plants and you'll lose a bunch of weight. It's like they already eat plants. Everything they eat is a plant, and they exercise, and they have excess body fat that is largely likely genetic / something environmental or something we don't even have the answer to. But the reality of it is you can't assume that a person is not taking care of themselves or is unhealthy based on the way they look. And you really shouldn't promise that adopting truly healthy behaviors that enhance your well-being, you really can't promise, oh, and I promise you're going to lose weight. It might help somebody sell a book or get another speaking gig or whatever, succeed in their business, but it doesn't really help people get healthier when you wrap up the idea that dieting is what you do to get healthy and that weight loss is what you need to do in order to be a healthier person.
That's absolutely true. I mean, I think one of the things that struck me as I was researching my own book again and again is the way in which the people who often were most likely to engage in these diets, certainly the books themselves, would talk about holistic health. Mm-hmm. They would talk about needing to treat the whole body. They would talk about how your whole body is a system. And yet, instead of really thinking about themselves as a system, mind and body, inevitably it would fall back into just thinking about yourself as a body that can be altered, as a body that faces the world. And that's not a holistic way of thinking about yourself at all. And the same goes to food, right? This idea that you could be thinking holistically about your health and ban sugar to the point where you're terrified to send your kid to a birthday party or where you're terrified to go to a wedding because there might be cake. That's actually an incredibly unholistic way of looking at your life. And so that really worries me. And I hope that people don't just pay lip service to this idea of holism, but take it seriously and stop just focusing on their body or on the banned foods and think about themselves with a wider perspective.
That's good. So let's reiterate why you would say that doing something like cutting out sugar, and I'll hear health experts, well, we don't mean all sugar. Fruits are still okay. Corn becomes sugar eventually. That's okay. It's like, I feel like that's the easy way out. I mean, there's still room even to have our desserts and added sugar in a healthful pattern of eating. But and what you're saying is when we follow this sort of extreme cut out sugar, that it's an unholistic way of living. So can you give me an example of why? Because I love it. It's very counterintuitive. And so I want to repeat that again, kind of like why that is not the thing we want to do.
Well, what happens when you ban something, when you make a strict rule about something, is you immediately isolate all of the aspects of your life in which you would have had that thing and say that they're not okay. So reducing sugar, for example, without banning it, if you think that if you're drinking too much soda, or if you're eating too many sugary things or eating too many processed foods, whatever it is, if you just say, hey, I want to reduce this, that means you can still go to a party and feel comfortable drinking a mixed drink or go to a birthday party and feel comfortable eating a cake. And that allows you to think about your whole life, right? The celebratory moments in addition to the everyday. But if you say to yourself, I'm going to go through my whole kitchen and scour it for anything with added sugars and get rid of that, what you've done is create a taboo for yourself, like a religious taboo, where all of a sudden, all these parts of your life that were important to you, visiting your family for the holidays and eating all those dishes that you used to eat as a kid that brought you together, those parts are cut out. So you're not thinking about your life as a whole. In fact, what I think happens when people ban these sugars is their vision narrows until all they can see is the shirtless body of whatever model is on the cover of the book that they're following. And all they can imagine is their own body looking that way. And as they go around the kitchen scouring it for sugar, they're not thinking to themselves, wait, I'm a chef. I like to cook. How am I going to make my barbecue sauce without this ketchup that has added sugar? There's a way in which actually banning foods from your life is the most unholistic way to approach changing yourself for the better.
I love that. I love that so much because I've said, oh, think about what you're missing out on. And is that really sustainable? Would you tell your best friend to do that? But I think this whole idea of challenging, saying, that's not really holistic because it's narrowing your life experience and it's kind of boxing you in. It reminds me of in body kindness when I talk about downward spiraling, that downward spiral narrows you and isolates you. It cuts you off. It hurts your mood and your emotions and your mental health because you're not engaging in connection with others and enjoying people and food. Now, of course, you have a food allergy. You're not going to eat something that makes you sick. If you're at a party and you really don't like the cake, you don't have to eat the cake just to show that you're enjoying yourself at the party. But that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is these plans out there. And I'll bring up Whole30 as an example. And to me, it's this is some of the most insidious form of dieting now because it's it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. It's a 30-day plan and then you reintegrate, blah, blah, blah. All I know is I had clients who would be like, well, now I don't know what to do. First day off, I ate 5 donuts. I've never eaten 5 donuts in one sitting before. What's that all about? So there's things like that. And even just, I don't have any of the books, but in what you can review on the Amazon previews, there's literally, it's marketed as we're going to give you tough love, which I think is an oxymoron. Tough love does not work. It's pressure, it's bullying, But then secondly, they literally say every piece of food you put in your mouth either helps your health or takes your health away. And I'm reading that going, that is so stinking extreme. And, but yet they present, look at all these amazing foods and wholesome foods. And to me, it hurts a person's good intentions of, I want to feel better. I know I need to eat better. I know I need to put more effort into my meals. I know I need to stop eating out of the ice cream while I put my feet up and watch Scandal or whatever's going on. It completely sabotages truly good intentions by, here's this miraculous plan, just follow it. But it is a restrictive diet. It's not a way of life. And like you said, it's unholistic. So what are your thoughts about something like that? And why do we buy into it?
Well, I think for one, it promises short-term gains. And because often these things are extreme, they mark a huge break from who you are. So the Whole30, all of a sudden you feel like you become a different person. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people who are seeking out these books, that's exactly what they want, right? Mm-hmm. And everyone, right, in a sense, who's dissatisfied with themselves wants to become someone else. Mm-hmm. And if you do that gradually, maintaining a coherent, holistic vision of the person you want to be combined with the person who you currently are, that doesn't satisfy our desire for immediate change. Mm. While as if you ban a bunch of foods that weren't in your life before and go through your kitchen and throw out a bunch of stuff, it feels initially very empowering. You feel like you are a different human being. I remember from my book, my wife and I, we love a cappuccino and a pastry in the morning. And so we said, hey, why don't we go gluten-free, sugar-free, and see how that feels. Mm-hmm. And the very next day, we go to the coffee shop, and I'll tell you, it was an extraordinary feeling. I really felt like I was a different person. Everything looked different to me. I couldn't have my cappuccino. I knew immediately what I was going to order. It was black coffee. I couldn't have anything else. I looked at all the pastries. I looked at all the people eating their pastries, and I thought to myself, well, I'm different from them now. And
virtuous.
It was virtuous. I'm better than you are. I don't need as much as you need to be happy. Ha ha ha. It was bizarre. Mm-hmm. It was a bizarrely empowering feeling. I was like, oh my gosh, this must be what's so alluring about these diets. But the problem is, unless you live in a community of people like that forever, unless you, as you said about your clients, unless you adopt that way of life for the rest of your life, you won't be able to sustain that feeling. And even if you can sustain that feeling, eventually it'll become the new normal and it won't give you that rush anymore.
Oh, well, that is a good point. I mentioned in Body Kindness that the idea of envisioning your better life is a dopamine reward in and of itself. And that fuels like our sadomasochistic attachment to them. Oh, well, maybe this is the thing, that you get this rush of imagining that your life is better. So that's true. So that's why they're so alluring, because they sell you a promise that you badly want. You get a dopamine reward and you suddenly feel the energy and the commitment that you need to follow it. And what you're saying is it's going to wear off over time. Like eventually you're just the cranky person ordering the tasteless black coffee when you really want a cappuccino.
That's absolutely right. I mean, unless you actually like those things for what they are, right? Unless you're, and this is the problem, is the evangelists of these diets, they are probably those few people who really want to live like that. They're the few people who really dislike sugar probably naturally as human beings, or manage to make themselves into the kind of person that only likes black coffee and hates all baked goods, that enjoys punishing themselves with exercise. And so for those people, that just becomes their life. But for the vast majority of those that they're speaking to, that's not sustainable over the long term. That's not the life you want to live. It's one thing I always tell people to think holistically is you'll hear people arguing for these diets. They'll say, well, think about how much longer you live, or think about the quality of your life. And I say, well, whenever you're thinking about that, subtract the number of hours you've spent looking at yourself in the mirror, or standing on the scale, or doing something that you felt was unpleasant. When you think of the added lifespan or the added quality of life, subtract those hours, days, months that you spent hating yourself or thinking that you weren't doing enough. And I think you'll find in the end that the benefits aren't nearly what people say that they are.
Yeah, that. And I hate to admit this being a health pro, but yes, our behaviors can impact our risk for chronic diseases, but not as much as we like to let people believe. We think it has all the impact, and it's much smaller than you really think.
Right. If only it were the case that, I mean, I am being sarcastic here, but if only it were the case that if you looked like a celebrity, that were actually the best indicator that you would live for a long time. Of course, that's nonsense, right? Yeah. And that's another thing that people say in order to give themselves the willpower that they need to keep up these unsustainable life practices. And that's a problem, right? It distorts science. It distorts our understanding of ourselves. And it also, quite honestly, I mean, if you're not even thinking about yourself, it poisons the way that you see the rest of the world and you see other people. I remember when I was not eating sugar or gluten, I looked at other people and I thought they were weaker and lower. I mean, it happened almost like a reflex that was built into me. And that was a really terrible feeling too. And there's one thing I also wanted to add when we were talking about these detoxes, the Whole30 or whatever it is. It doesn't take a whole lot to poison your understanding of a food, to poison your relationship with something. There are people who got food poisoning from one food and they won't eat it for the rest of their life. Well, imagine what you're doing to your relationship with sugar when for 30 days you cut it out of your life like tobacco or crack cocaine. You're never going to have a normal relationship with that food ever again. I mean, maybe you will, but it's certainly a danger. And to think that people wouldn't consider the unintended consequences of pathologizing foods by banning them from their life is, to me, it's irresponsible. There should be a warning label on every single elimination diet that says, caution, your relationship with foods that you eliminate may never be the same again.
Ooh, I would support that label. I mean, we've talked about sugar a couple times, but and speaking of poison, I really want to talk to you about sugar because I feel like, especially this year, it's going to be around. And I know on Twitter and whatnot, I've seen some of your comments about sugar and sugar addiction and everything. So like, let's just talk about it. What do you want to say about where the science is at with sugar and what the diet trends are and what your thoughts are on it?
So as a historian of food fears, I'm always very skeptical of the demonization of a food. For my in-laws, it wasn't specifically sugar, it was salt, right? So they don't ever salt anything. And now that's changing a little bit and people are much more willing to salt things, but sugar is the new dietary demon. So I spoke with a lot of scientists, endocrinologists, and the state of the science right now is that everyone is very sure that as a culture, we eat too much sugar. So this happens to be a food that we consume excessively. And so I don't think there's any question in the science that we would do well, again, as a culture, to reduce the amount of sugar that we consume. But there's a big difference between going from 6 sodas a day to 1 soda a day, or from turning soda into a discretionary food or whatever you want to call it, rather than something that you have with every single meal. There's a big difference between that and paranoidally reading the label of your Asian sauce to make sure that the second or third ingredient isn't sugar. And what I fear is that our attitude towards sugar now the one that's supported by the science is that, again, as a culture, not as individuals, right? Because there's a lot of variation in a culture. We ought to be consuming less of it. But as individuals, the science does not say that sugar is toxic in the way that cigarettes are toxic. It does not say, and go to any addiction clinic and they will be very angry at you if you say that sugar is like heroin or crack cocaine. So the science on those kinds of extreme analogies simply isn't in. And so I think we need to be very careful to distinguish between what is incontrovertibly true, which is that we consume too much sugar as a culture, and what is incontrovertibly false, which is that you can't be healthy if you consume any of this dangerous toxin.
I agree. And this really bothered me. I mean, first of all, because we do often lump foods that could be perfectly nutritious, like fruits and even like canned peaches. You can't get peaches year round. And so putting canned peaches on oatmeal can be very delicious and nutritious. But this idea of, well, that has sugar in it. So being able to separate the idea of what is naturally occurring versus added. And I think when we see the food label contain added sugars, we'll start to see the difference that milk that has sugar in it was supposed to be there. When we have babies and we nurse, our milk tastes like sugar. It's what's palatable. So there's a real reason for that. But even things like if you drink kefir, which is a probiotic, yes, they make it plain, but they also make some that has fruit in it that does have added sugar. But can you really say that that is bad for your health because you're also getting the good bacteria for your GI and how that can be beneficial? Plus, you like the taste of it. Plus, it's a great snack that keeps you from going to the vending machine. It's like context, context, context. But I even got curious. As a nutrition student, you look a lot at the NHANES data, and it's like the largest body of food eating patterns we have. And so I got curious of what is our most recent NHANES data? What does it say about our actual consumption of added sugar versus recommendations? And I was shocked when I found this one article. I did a Facebook Live about it. I'll share it in the notes for today's show. And the first thing I went to is who funded it. Because if it was going to be funded by the sugar industry, I was going to not pay attention. And there were no biases, no funding. And what these researchers basically challenged is, would lowering the added sugar recommendations even be sustainable for Americans? And what they cite is that the actual added sugar intake, according to NHANES, is 13% of total calories, and that the recommended is 10%. So like you said, that is evidence that we are consuming too much added sugar. But I was surprised at how close it was. That 3% didn't translate to me to sugar is toxic poison, going to put you in a coffin. The number one source of added sugar is soda. And I don't drink soda. Rarely do I drink soda. So I'm like, okay, so if I'm not a soda drinker, where would my number fall? And it's likely that if you don't drink the number one source, soda, that you're likely following under that 10%. So you're meeting the guidelines. It wouldn't be helpful to lower the guidelines because now you're talking about maybe every 2 or 3 weeks getting to have a dessert. And what these researchers kind of argued is even if, who are we to judge if a person really does enjoy a soda over desserts and chocolate or other ways of getting sugar, that's a personal preference and choice. And that they, in order to follow healthy eating patterns, they would definitely need to limit it, but that there's room to meet your nutrition needs, to get your fiber. So for anti-inflammatory, for immune support, for energy, to prevent diabetes, like all these things, right? There is still room to have some amount of added sugar. So it's definitely the unsexy moderation message. But I just found that to be very fascinating, that we're not that far off from what the headlines would have you believe. And that if you're already health conscious, which let's face it, it's the most health conscious people that are walking around afraid of sugar anyway.
Right.
We're the ones that are probably doing just fine. So to me, I really take issue with, like you said, the demonization of it. Even when I talk to, because I really do want to follow the science around food addiction. And I'll tell you from my standpoint in treating people with eating disorders, it is a mixed bag, just like you said. But even the people who are the most staunch supporters of evidence for food addiction, they will, in their writing papers, they will tell you that you've got to screen for eating disorders like binge eating disorder and things like that first. And even when you do, that a vast majority of people will feel and perceive that they have a food addiction or a sugar addiction, but it's not so, that they would not meet the criteria, that only a very, very, very small percentage of people could meet the criteria for food addiction. And I think that's important to note, because rather than just saying there's no way there's any food addiction whatsoever, but just that when we have 80% of people who aren't satisfied with their bodies, and we have all these messages that we need to be more pure and clean and change our bodies, that lumping in do Whole30, avoid sugar, it's going to kill you, is not necessarily helpful. And that is my beef with it. It's make changes, like you said, and that's an individual thing. You know what you're putting in your mouth and in your body, and it can be difficult to make behavior changes. Do that difficult work. But is it really going to be helpful for you to just pick up the next plan, follow their rules, only to break them, and then feel like you're the loser, you're the one who couldn't do it?
Right, absolutely. It can be very traumatic. And I also think it makes it so, so I remember when, again, I came to, no dog in this fight. I came to this stuff again as a religion scholar, and I was just shocked to experience something that I'm sure you're familiar with in your clients and maybe in your own life, which is that I realized that as I was researching my book, when I was sitting down to eat my meals, I was doing this frenetic cost-benefit analysis of everything I was eating. It was subconscious. So I'd sit down and be like, well, I'm eating this chicken, so that's pretty good for me, but I'm planning on having dessert. That's bad. And I've got this glass of wine. It's bad, but this red wine, so it's good. And it's like, and there was this chattering in my head that was either pathologizing everything I was eating or making it into some kind of virtuous act. And it really took away from the joy of just being able to eat, to be able to eat and not think about it as means to an end, to not break it down in terms of what was good for me or what was bad for me or whether it was balanced, right? And as someone who loves to cook and has always loved to cook, everyone in my family loves to cook. That's just not how you think about food when you care about food as an aesthetic act. And I'll tell you, for a very long time until I wrote my book, and now after I wrote my book, I still eat very healthfully by never thinking about whether the food is good for me, but actually just thinking about what I'd like to cook. I go to the store, I see what vegetables look good, I see what protein looks good, I cook something from whatever culinary tradition I happen to be interested in, whether it's Chinese or Indian, and everything comes out great and everything comes out healthy. And the best thing about it is I didn't have to think to myself, oh, I need to ban this food in order to make my dinner something good. Oh, I'm going to add up all the ingredients and make sure they work. And,
what's my macros in this Indian dish?
Exactly. I would never do that. And, if you look at cookbooks, generally speaking, most culinary traditions have produced patterns of eating that would be fine if you followed them. And that goes for the high carb rice diet of the Japanese and the low carb diet of whatever other culture you want to take. I mean, there's actually a lot of ways of eating healthfully, and reducing them to these numbers and ingredients, it seems to me, is counterproductive and sucks joy out of one of the most beautiful and amazing aspects of our life, which is the enjoyment of food and flavor with people that we love.
I could not agree with you more. And I was a joyless eater for as long as I was a chronic dieter, because it's impossible to feel good. You're in a negative space about what do I need to avoid, right? Like you're playing Space Invaders or something. It's like, I don't want to get hit. It takes so much effort. And to me, the non-diet approach, first of all, major myth. Second, they hear non-diet, they think, so I'm not changing anything. And so they get put off. Oh, well, how am I ever going to reach goals? So it's, no, you will change something. I can't tell you whether or not you're going to lose weight because that's your body. And frankly, what about the people who don't have weight concerns? You don't want to keep healthful eating tips from them either. But it's this idea of not following a regimented diet plan, but having enough knowledge about nutrition, about the value of balance, and the knowledge of behaviors. So if you're someone who doesn't cook a lot and don't feel like you like to cook, that kind of person is going to need help with easy to follow tips, not even recipes. I'll have clients like, what's a good recipe for me? I'm like, tell me what's in your fridge. Oh, I got some salmon. I got some carrots. It's like, okay, salmon, carrots, apple. And they're like, but what about, do I need herbs for the salmon and lemon juice and this and that. And yeah, those things enhance and make a difference. But if we're talking between avoiding McDonald's and eating something from your refrigerator to save money, waste less food, feel good about your eating, it can be a lot simpler. And then you move it on to the next challenge. So it really builds and grows. And yeah, I think it's this idea that it is possible to not follow a diet and to choose healthy eating patterns and to understand that it's not going to be easy all the time. Pretty much every week on Friday nights, I look through my fridge. I really value saving money for my family and not wasting food. So I'll look through the fridge and pantry to start to think about what are we going to eat for the next week and start to make the grocery list. And then on Saturdays, I have a routine of pre-cooking some stuff, getting some stuff from the store. And I do that because I know that the whole next week, meals are effortless. My whole family is busy. It fits our lifestyle and it does save money in the long run. But that doesn't mean that every Saturday morning I'm dancing out of bed, into the kitchen, can't wait to prep the food. Like sometimes you have to do things because you want the benefit of what it gives you in your life. And all that stuff is effort enough. You don't need to do the extra work to figure out, did I hit my grams of fiber? Did I cut, my sugar low enough? It's actually so much easier than that when you focus on what are the routines and patterns I need to follow until they get easy. And I think we miss that point when we talk about not dieting, that there is a structure,
Absolutely. I agree. And I think that it's important, again, that structure be oriented around goals that we can really get behind and goals that actually make sense. We need to ask ourselves, am I structuring my life around the belief that if I look a certain way, I'm going to be happy? Because guess what? No matter what you think about the science on anything else, happiness does not come when you look a certain way. Mm-hmm. All you need to do, and I would never recommend reading the tabloids at any other time, but all you need to do to see that beauty doesn't lead to happiness is to read those same stupid magazines that are poisoning us with the idea that it does, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the crazy thing. So to set up the structure of your life in a way that is unsustainable and difficult and point it at a goal that's actually a lie, well, that seems to me to be the saddest thing of all, because even in the unlikely event that you succeed with your diet, it's still going to be a failure. The best you're going to be able to do is put photos of yourself on social media that lie to other people about your newfound joy and make them undertake the same task. It's an awful cycle, and it's something that we really need to break out of. And I really appreciated that your book tries to do that. And like you said, moderation, or the idea that looking beautiful isn't going to make you happy, whatever beautiful happens to me, because usually it's just synonymous with thinner than I am now.
Less of me.
But that's not the promise of a miracle. That's not a simple solution. Talking about changing your life and telling people to recognize that maybe the goals that they have for themselves are mistaken and they've been put there by society that's trying to sell them diets or trying to sell them beautification products. That might not be the message that sells as well as eliminate nightshades and sugar and your inflamed, disgusting body will turn into something pure and joyous, right? That's not, maybe it doesn't have the same kind of serotonin boost in the short term, but in the long term, I think it's much, much better for individuals and for the community that they live in.
It's so true to acknowledge the sort of sales cycle that goes into it. There needs to be something that looks new and fresh and catchy, because that will get eyeballs and clicks and subscriptions and all that stuff. And it's all kind of part of recycling through. We've got to get them that next thing because now they've heard enough about that and now it's on to this. And it's understandable when you have new research and innovation and stuff. Like, I'm fascinated by gut health and digestive health. And I feel like we're still only at the beginning stages of really understanding it. You see it kind of treat your gut right and lose weight. That is going to go right back to salesy thing. And I think that people who are interested in the idea of body kindness or non-diet approach, it's like, really you find all your power in saying, like, let me do something that works for me. You can actually pick and choose what you do think would be helpful. If it's making you afraid, it's probably not good. You know, it's probably trying to manipulate you in some way, but it's okay to be dissatisfied with the choices you're making and how you're living your life. And that doesn't mean that that miracle promise is going to be the solution. It's like, do put your effort into what it's going to take for you to make your life better and not make it be just about your body. Because yeah, like you said, you could be unhappy at any size. I've certainly seen that and felt that and lived that. And even the idea that as we get older in age, our bodies are meant to change and look a little different anyway. You know, it's just the more we put, when you mentioned adding up the years of your life that you waste, you know, the more effort that we say worth is in appearance and put, you know, what are you not getting to do and enjoy in your life? And I guarantee you that is a much more stressful way to be, which is worse for your health than just figuring it out of what's going to work for you in the first place. And hold yourself accountable to what feels healthy to you. Some of it might feel like a diet. You're going to have to do that work. Like, no, I'm really choosing broccoli because I like sauteed broccoli with some garlic and olive oil, and I care about my health. But if you're starting to get that feel for this feels like a diet, really question, what are some other ways that I can do this thing that I know is good for my body? So I stop labeling it, this is a diet thing, this is a weight loss thing. And I know I had to go through that myself, that you just really need to kind of get clear with, it's okay to do what I want to do. It might not necessarily be easy.
Right. Absolutely. But at least it's not using labels that are counterproductive.
Yeah, I agree. So we need to wrap it up here pretty soon, but I just wanted to see, I think a big trend, you know, with sugar, I'm glad that we had a chance to talk about that. Is there anything else that you are thinking about might change people's attitudes to food as we look ahead to this 2017? Is there anything else on your radar?
Well, I think, and this is an optimistic thing, I think that people are going to stop focusing on themselves in their relationship to their food and also start thinking about how that impacts the world. And we're seeing that already. But the idea that we ought to eat in a way that is sustainable and that we ought to think about the kinds of things that we can eat as a culture and as a world, because we don't just exist as a nation. What kinds of dietary patterns are sustainable for all of us living on this planet together? I think that's going to be front and center in people's minds. And I think that a lot of the trend to eating meat, for example, I think people are going to realize that you can't just eat, 50% of your calories in meat or whatever, and also think about that as a part of a globally sustainable food system. So that's something that I really hope and expect people to think about more. And again, changing our dietary patterns so that we eat more sustainably doesn't mean banning things. It doesn't mean you have to be a vegetarian. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it doesn't mean that you have to never eat meat. What it does mean is that focusing solely on ourselves when thinking about what food is good for, and specifically our physical bodies, I think is going to be no longer possible for people. And honestly, I think that's a good thing. I
would agree with you with that. There's a couple concerns that have been brewing in my mind. One is the idea, and even I think I use plant-based terminology in Body Kindness. And for me, plant-based has always meant that most of what you eat is plants. And even when you look at my plate that's been around now since 2005, I think they went from the pyramid to the plate. 3/4 of a thing, fruit, vegetable, starch, grain, beans, and then there was a tiny part for meat, right? And so plant-based has always meant that there's a balance to your plate and variety and all this stuff. I've seen lately plant-based being used and hijacked to support vegan and vegetarian and ultra clean, no meat. And so I'm just like, well, that's not really plant-based. So I would watch out for that. And I agree with you 100% about people realizing how their choices impact not just their body, but their family and things they care about. But I hope in a positive way how you connect to the world. So I'm not a vegetarian, but I believe that one of the ways I make a difference is by reducing food waste in the home, and it provides multiple benefits, right? And I compost. And in the composting, I'm lucky there. I have a service. So they literally drop off the little bin and pick it up. You pay for the service. So I'm fortunate to be able to afford that, acknowledging that privilege there. That's not going to be everybody. That's not going to be people who live 5 miles from me and who are on food stamps. It's if they can compost in the community for free, great. I would encourage that. But you can't ask a person, everybody to be able to do this. But I feel good because it's a veteran-owned business, is giving jobs. It feeds this only worm farm in Maryland. And I literally teach my kids, okay, we have a little bit extra. Can we reuse this? No. Okay, let's feed the worms. And so it's become kind of, we're not going to Disney World this year. We'll take some other type of vacation or whatever, but I'm going to fund this. We're going to cook together. And when we have food we can't use anymore, it's going to go to feed the worms and we get free compost and then we garden with it. So it becomes this whole circle where I can be mindful in so many ways about how to feel good physically in my body with my food choices and feel good about the footprints I'm leaving in the world. But I don't have to go to extreme and grow my own food because that's never going to be me. Or I don't have to become a vegan. And I can be mindful, but without it stressing me out. And that's what I would encourage people there, is that you don't have to follow the rule book for sustainably eating if that's going to stress you out. But it's what small step could you take? And what do you naturally care about? You don't have to care about the environment today if it's more important to you to care about stopping your emotional eating at night. But that very well could come into your context. And when you do, if you notice you feel better, say, eating less meat because you were eating a lot of meat, that might be great for you and work for you. But that's not necessarily a plan that's going to work for everybody else. And, I think those types of things are really important. Cool. Well, how can people connect with you and find you and follow you if they want to read your stuff and learn more of your wisdom?
I don't know if I would call it wisdom, but I do. I am
you
always
have opinions.
trying to learn from people and tell them whatever I have learned in my own life. So I'm on Twitter at Alan Levinovitz, and my book's available on Amazon, and I write regularly for, as you said, Slate and Vox and Washington Post, Eon Magazine. So all of those places are good to look for me. You Google my name and definitely follow me on Twitter, where I post things that I've written and interact with people, sometimes angrily online. I really don't like fat shaming. If I see another headless fat body used as a symbol of what's wrong with our society, I'll go crazy. So,
I know. Oh, me too. Well, I'm grateful for your voice in that space. And I'm excited to see more growth in this idea of body positivity. I mean, I don't even want to call it an idea anymore. It's a movement. Slowly but surely, the dietitians in my profession are really learning that being body positive doesn't mean that you refuse habit changes. It just means that you agree to not battle your body anymore and that you agree to take care of it. So I hope to see more of that. I will include all the links and connections to your Twitter in the show notes. And just thank you so much. I highly recommend the listeners pick up your book. I'll give the Amazon link to that. I loved it. It was very eye-opening. It was interesting to listen to. It went very fast. I got it done in a day, and I'm not going to spoil it, but I love the way you close the book. It is a must read, must listen. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope all the listeners have a happy and healthy day.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's been great talking to you.
If you're enjoying listening to this podcast, let me know. Shoot me a note and tell me what you'd like to hear more of. Recommend a guest. And let me know how we can improve the episodes. I'm always interested in answering questions that you may have, especially in my shows with Bernie. So you can email me, Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com, and let me know how I can continue to make you happy.